The silver ships appeared in Earth's sky like falling stars, but they moved with purpose rather than chaos. Admiral Kim Tae-ho pressed his face against the window of the Seoul Command Center, watching as 6 massive vessels descended toward different continents. Each ship was beautiful in a way that made his chest tight with wonder and fear. "Sir, they're landing exactly where we agreed," reported his aide, Lieutenant Park Jin-woo. The young man's voice shook slightly. None of them had ever imagined this day would actually come. Down in the research labs beneath the command center, Dr. Park Soo-jin adjusted her equipment for the 100th time. As Earth's lead xenobiologist, she would be among the first humans to study these visitors up close. Her hands trembled as she checked her recording devices. Everything had to be perfect. The Zephyrians emerged from their ships like dancers stepping onto a stage. They were tall, much taller than humans, with limbs that seemed to flow rather than walk. Their skin shimmered with a pale blue light, and their robes changed colors as they moved from deep purple to silver to gold. It was their faces that captured everyone's attention. They smiled with such warmth that even the most nervous human delegates felt their fears melting away. "Welcome, people of Earth," said the first Zephyrian to speak. His voice came through a small device that translated his words into perfect Korean, English, and dozens of other languages simultaneously. "I am Veltar, chosen speaker for our people. We have traveled many light years to meet you." President Lee Do-yoon stepped forward, her diplomatic training taking over despite her amazement. "We greet you with open hearts and minds. I am President Lee Do-yoon, speaking for all of humanity." The gifts the Zephyrians brought were unlike anything humans had ever seen. Crystal structures that sang gentle melodies when touched, that contained thousands of years of alien art, music, and literature. Medical devices that could heal wounds in minutes. Energy generators that produced clean power from nothing more than ambient space radiation. These are tokens of friendship. Veltar explained as human scientists carefully examined each item. "Where we come from, knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. We hope you will accept our invitation to join the Galactic Collective, a union of peaceful species working together for the betterment of all." The celebrations that followed lasted for weeks. Every major city on Earth held parades and festivals. Children drew pictures of their new alien friends. Adults lined up to see the Zephyrian ships and meet the visitors. The stock market soared as companies imagined the possibilities of alien technology. World leaders worked day and night to establish formal diplomatic relationships, but Dr. Park Soo-jin found herself unable to fully join the celebration. Something nagged at her as she studied the historical records the Zephyrians had shared. Late at night, after the crowds had gone home and the politicians had finished their speeches, she sat in her lab with her colleague Dr. Choi Min-ho, staring at holographic star charts. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to a cluster of star systems. "The Zephyrians have been exploring the galaxy for over 500 years. They've made contact with 47 different intelligent species." Min-ho nodded. "That's impressive. They must have learned so much about different cultures and technologies." "That's just it," Soo-jin said, her voice growing quieter. "At the current galactic maps they've shown us, only 12 of those 47 species are listed as active members of the Galactic Collective. The rest are marked as having chosen peaceful isolation." Min-ho frowned as he studied the data. More carefully, "That does seem odd. Why would so many species choose to isolate themselves after making contact with such advanced and friendly beings?" Soo-jin pulled up more detailed records. "I've been reading about some of these isolated species, the Valathi. For example, they were described as a proud warrior culture that controlled 3 star systems. According to early Zephyrian reports, they were fierce, independent, and highly advanced in military technology. What happened to them? According to the records, they evolved beyond the need for conflict within just 2 generations of contact with the Zephyrians. They gave up their military, dismantled their weapons, and chose to focus on art and philosophy instead." Min-ho was quiet for a long moment. That's a very dramatic change for an entire civilization. It's not just the Valathi, Soo-jin continued. "The Corvani were master traders who built the largest commercial empire in their region. After contact with the Zephyrians, they gave up trade and became contemplative gardeners. The Decamore were renowned explorers who mapped entire sectors of space. They stopped exploring and became peaceful scholars. Maybe, Minho said slowly. The Zephyrians just inspire others to become more peaceful. Sujin stared at the data, her scientist's mind troubled by the pattern she was seeing. Maybe there's something else going on. Something we need to understand before we get too excited about joining their galactic collective. Outside, the celebrations continued. Humans danced in the streets, marveling at their new friends from the stars. But in the quiet of the research lab, two scientists began to ask the questions that would eventually change everything. Neither of them knew that their curiosity would one day save their entire species from a fate worse than conquest. 6 months had passed since the silver ships first touched Earth soil, and the world looked completely different. The skylines of major cities now glowed with soft blue light from Zephyrian energy sources. Schools had replaced history classes about wars with lessons about peaceful cooperation. Even the Olympic Games had been canceled, replaced with something called harmony festivals, where people shared art and poetry instead of competing. Former Colonel Park Jae-sung stood in his new office, watching through the window as workers dismantled the last military checkpoint in Seoul. His uniform felt strange now. He was no longer a colonel, just a liaison officer, helping to coordinate between Earth's shrinking military and their new alien friends. The title made him feel hollow inside. "This is wonderful progress," said Nelum, the Zephyrian advisor assigned to oversee the military transition. The alien's voice was always calm, always patient, like a teacher speaking to a slow child. "Species is learning to move beyond the primitive need for violence. Soon, you will discover the true joy of harmonious existence." Jae-sung nodded politely, but his stomach twisted with unease. He had spent 20 years in the military, had seen how quickly peace could turn to chaos when people were unprepared to defend themselves. Now he watched as humanity's ability to fight back was being systematically removed, all in the name of becoming better people. That evening, he made a decision that would change everything. He called Dr. Park Soo-jin, the xenobiologist who had been studying the Zephyrians since day one. They met in her small apartment, away from the monitoring devices that had been installed in all government buildings for better cultural integration. "I've been researching the species they mentioned," Soo-jin said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The ones that chose isolation. I've found detailed records of their interactions with each one." She activated a small holographic projector showing images of various alien species. "Look at this," she continued, pointing to a fierce-looking DDD creature with armor-like skin and multiple arms. The Valathi. They were incredible warriors who controlled 3 entire star systems. They had fought off invasions, built massive fleets, and were known across the galaxy for their military genius. Jae-sung studied the image. They look formidable. What happened to them? According to the Zephyrian records, they evolved beyond conflict within just 2 generations of contact. They gave up their weapons, disbanded their fleets, and became peaceful philosophers. The entire warrior culture that had taken thousands of years to build just ... disappeared. The former colonel felt a chill run down his spine. That's not evolution. That's cultural suicide. No species abandons its survival instincts that quickly. Soo-jin nodded grimly. It gets worse. The Corvani were master traders who built the largest commercial empire in their sector. After meeting the Zephyrians, they gave up trade and became contemplative gardeners. The Ekmar were famous explorers who mapped unknown regions of space. They stopped exploring and became peaceful scholars. "Every single one?" Jae-sung asked. "Every single one. 47 species made contact with the Zephyrians. Only 12 are still active in the galaxy. The rest chose isolation after becoming what the Zephyrians call enlightened." Before Jae-sung could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Dr. Choi Minho entered, carrying a small device that looked like a scanner. His face was pale with worry. "I've been testing the gifts," Minho said, without preamble. "The crystal structures, the artwork, even the food they've shared with us, I found something disturbing. He activated his scanner and pointed it at a small crystal ornament sitting on Sujin's shelf, a gift from the Zephyrians that most humans now kept in their homes. The device immediately began beeping. These crystals emit low-frequency sound waves, Minho explained. The frequency is just below what human ears can detect, but it affects our brain chemistry. I've been studying brain scans from people who spent a lot of time around Zephyrian technology. What kind of effects? Jasun asked, though he was beginning to guess the answer. Increased serotonin production, decreased activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain that handles fear and aggression. People become more content, less likely to question authority, and much less inclined to fight back when threatened. 3 humans sat in silence for a moment, the implications sinking in. Finally, Jae-sung spoke what they were all thinking. They're not conquering us with weapons. They're changing us at the most basic level, making us into something we're not. It's brilliant, really, Sujin said bitterly. Why fight a war when you can just convince your enemies to give up fighting altogether? Why destroy a civilization when you can transform it into something harmless? Minho looked at his scanner readings again. The worst part is, I don't think they see it as evil. They genuinely believe they're helping us evolve into something better. They think aggression and competitiveness are diseases that need to be cured. Jae-sung stood up, his military training kicking in. We need to warn people. We need to show them what's happening before it's too late. Who's going to believe us? Sujin asked. Crime is down. Wars have ended. People are more peaceful than ever. If we tell them it's all artificial, that we're being manipulated, they'll think we're crazy. Then, we need proof, Jae-sung said. Real, undeniable proof of what the Zephyrians are doing. We need to find others who are still capable of seeing the truth. As they made their plans, none of them noticed the small device hidden behind Sujin's bookshelf. A device that had been quietly recording their conversation and transmitting it to interested parties who were very concerned about human resistance to their peaceful mission. Dr. Park Sujin's fingers shook as she typed the final commands into her computer. The abandoned military bunker felt cold and damp around her, but she barely noticed. What she had discovered in the Zephyrian databases made her stomach turn with a mixture of fear and anger. Are you sure about this? Asked former Colonel Park Jae-sung, standing behind her with his arms crossed. The small group had grown over the past weeks. Besides Dr. Choi Minho, they now included Captain Lee Hae-won, a tough woman who had once led Special Forces missions, and Dr. Kim Seung-gwa, a brain specialist who had been secretly studying what the alien technology was doing to human minds. I'm sure, Sujin replied, pressing the final key. The bunker's wall lit up with holographic images and documents that made everyone in the room go silent. They've been watching us for over 100 years, Sujin said, her voice barely steady, long before they made official contact. Look at this. She pointed to a timeline that showed major events in human history alongside Zephyrian observation notes. The documents were written in the alien language. But Sujin had learned to read enough to understand their meaning. In 1969, when humans first landed on the moon, they were there. They watched us from hidden ships. They studied how we fought wars, how we competed with each other, how we built and destroyed civilizations. Captain Lee Hae-won stepped closer to the wall, her soldier's instincts making her examine every detail. These dates, some of them match up with major technological breakthroughs. The development of the internet, advances in medical science, even some of our space exploration technology. That's because they helped guide those discoveries, Sujin said grimly. Not directly, but they influenced key researchers and inventors. They've been slowly preparing us for this moment, making us more cooperative and less aggressive over decades. Dr. Kim Sung-woo, who had been quietly studying brain scans on his portable device, looked up with a pale face. It's worse than we thought. I've been comparing brain scans from humans who lived in areas with heavy Zephyrian influence versus those who didn't. The changes started showing up in some populations years before first contact. What kind of changes? Reduced activity in the parts of the brain that handle fear and aggression. Increased production of chemicals that make people feel calm and content. They've been testing their methods on small groups of humans for years, perfecting their techniques. Jae-sung clenched his fists, so when they finally revealed themselves, they already knew exactly how to manipulate us. It gets worse, Sujin continued, bringing up another set of documents. They've been studying our entertainment too. Movies, books, video games. They've been analyzing what makes humans think and feel. They even influence some of our stories, to make the idea of peaceful alien contact seem more appealing. The group fell silent as they realized how completely they had been manipulated. Everything they had believed about first contact, about humanity's reaction to meeting aliens, had been carefully planned and controlled. Suddenly, a soft chime filled the bunker. The communication system activated on its own, and the holographic form of Veltar appeared in the center of the room. The Zephyrian ambassador looked at them with his usual gentle smile, but there was something different in his eyes, a sadness. That seemed almost human, my dear friends, Veltar said, his voice as calm and soothing as always. We understand you have concerns about our cultural exchange. We have been monitoring your discussions, and we are not angry. We are simply concerned for your well-being. The humans exchanged quick glances. They had been careful, but apparently not careful enough. We would be honored to address your worries, the ambassador continued, and help you understand the beautiful future we can build together. There is no need for fear or suspicion. We only want what is best for humanity. Sujin forced herself to smile, knowing that any sign of hostility would only confirm the aliens' belief that humans needed to be corrected. We would welcome the chance to discuss this with you, Ambassador. Perhaps we could meet tomorrow, of course, Veltar replied. I will come to you personally. There is much we need to talk about. His image faded, leaving the bunker in darkness. As soon as the communication ended, Jae-sung turned to the others. We're running out of time. They know we're onto them, and they're going to try to convince us that resistance is pointless. The scary part, said Captain Lee Hai-won, is that they're not evil. They genuinely believe they're helping us.
How?
They see our ability to fight, to compete, to survive against impossible odds as diseases that need to be cured. Minho nodded slowly. They're like gardeners who think wild roses are too aggressive and need to be bred into something gentler. They don't understand that the thorns are what keep the rose alive. So what do we do? Asked Dr. Kim Sung-woo. How do we fight an enemy who thinks they're saving us? Jae-sung looked around at his small group of rebels, thinking of all the humans who were already beginning to lose their edge. Their fighting spirit, their essential humanity. We remind them why our species survived ice ages, plagues, and wars. We show them what happens when you try to domesticate something that was born to be wild. Outside the bunker, the world continued to change, becoming more peaceful and harmonious with each passing day. But deep underground, a small group of humans began planning to save their species from a fate they considered worse than death, the loss of everything that made them human. The meeting with Ambassador Veltar had gone exactly as Park Jae-sung expected. The Zephyrian had sat across from them in the government building, his tall form radiating calm patience as he listened to their concerns. His voice never changed tone, never showed irritation, even when they questioned his people's methods. We understand your worries, Veltar had said, his alien features arranged in what humans had learned to recognize as a smile. Change is always difficult, especially for a species as spirited as yours. But you must trust that we have guided many civilizations through this beautiful transformation. Soon, you will see how much happier humanity can be without the burden of aggression and competition. Every word had been carefully chosen to make them feel foolish for resisting. Jae-sung had watched his companions' faces, seeing how even they began to doubt themselves under the aliens' gentle manipulation. Only their weeks of preparation had kept them from giving in completely. Now, 3 days later, Jae-sung stood in the abandoned subway tunnels beneath Seoul, looking at faces lit by the glow of emergency lighting. His carefully worded messages, veterans, scientists, teachers, and even some teenagers who still remembered what it felt like to fight for something. They're not evil, he told the group, his voice echoing slightly in the concrete tunnel. That's what makes this so dangerous? Genuinely believe they're helping us become better people. They see our ability to fight, to compete, to struggle against impossible odds as diseases that need to be cured. Captain Lee Haiwan nodded grimly. I've been watching the military bases. Half our weapons have been decommissioned. The other half are being converted into what they call cultural preservation displays. They're turning our ability to defend ourselves into museum pieces. Dr. Kim Seung-hwa raised his hand. I've been studying children who've been exposed to Zephyrian education programs. They're losing their natural competitive instincts. Kids who used to fight over toys now share everything peacefully. Sounds good, but they're also losing the drive to excel, to push themselves, to take risks. My students don't write stories about heroes anymore, added Ms. Yoon Jun, a literature teacher. They write about harmony and cooperation. I assigned them to write about conflict. They couldn't understand why anyone would want to fight for anything. Young O Manesio, barely 18, but already skilled in martial arts, spoke up from the back of the group. My little brother used to love playing soldier. Oh, he says fighting is primitive and wants to spend all his time making art. When I try to teach him basic self-defense, he cries and says, I'm being mean. The group murmured agreement. Similar stories were being repeated across the planet. Humanity was becoming gentler, more peaceful, more cooperative. On the surface, it seemed like paradise. But those who remembered what humans had been like before, first contact, could see what was being lost. We need to wake people up, said Dr. Park Soo-jin, stepping forward. But we can't do it through direct confrontation. The Zephyrians have made resistance look selfish and primitive. We need to be smarter than that. How? Asked someone from the crowd. Jae-soon had been thinking about this for weeks. We remind them of their heritage, not through speeches or arguments, but through stories, through games, through teaching them skills they think they no longer need. The plan they developed was simple but clever. Veterans would start teaching historical combat techniques as cultural preservation, the same way museums taught ancient crafts. Teachers would incorporate classical literature into their lessons, stories about human struggles and triumphs that had been quietly disappearing from school curricula. Parents would tell their children bedtime stories about brave warriors and clever tacticians, framing them as historical education rather than encouragement to fight. We're not telling people to rebel, Jae-soon explained. We're just helping them remember who they used to be, who they really are underneath all this artificial peace. The resistance began small. A martial arts instructor started teaching traditional Korean combat forms as cultural heritage. A history teacher began assigning essays about great military leaders as historical research. A mother told her son stories about ancient warriors as family history. The Zephyrians, focused on their grand project of transforming human society, initially missed these subtle changes. They were watching for organized rebellion, for angry protests, for the kind of violent resistance they had read about in human history books. They weren't looking for quiet grandmothers teaching their grandchildren how to throw a proper punch, or for children playing historical reenactment, games that looked suspiciously like the war games that had been banned. But slowly, something began to stir in humanity. Not anger or hatred, but a quiet recognition of what they were losing. People began to remember the satisfaction of winning a hard-fought competition. Children rediscovered the thrill of overcoming a challenge through their own strength and skill. Adults found themselves missing the edge that had once driven them to achieve great things. Dr. Choi Min-ho, who had been monitoring global communications from his hidden equipment, brought disturbing news to their next meeting. They're accelerating their timeline. The final integration protocols are being implemented ahead of schedule. They expect complete cultural absorption within 6 months. The news hit the group like a physical blow. 6 months to save their species from becoming something they know longer recognized. Then we're out of time for subtle resistance, Jae-sung said, his military training taking over. It's time to remind the galaxy what happens when you corner a species that survived by never giving up, no matter how impossible. The odds? Around the tunnel, 43 faces looked back at him with expressions the Zephyrians had been trying to eliminate from humanity for months. Determination, defiance, the quiet, dangerous resolve of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its planet's food chain and had no intention of giving up that position without a fight. It started with a child's voice heard around the world. 8-year-old Yoonji, who sat in his father's lap, looking up with confused eyes as the recording equipment captured their conversation. His father, Yoon Dae-hyun, had been a Marine before the Zephyrians arrived and convinced humanity to give up their military. "Daddy, why can't we fight back?" the little boy asked, his voice small but clear. "The other kids at school say we're not supposed to want to fight anymore, but I don't understand why." Dae-hyun looked into his son's eyes, seeing the spark of defiance that the Zephyrians were trying so hard to extinguish. He made a decision that would change everything. "Because, son," he said gently, "they want us to forget who we really are. They want us to forget that we're the species that turned wild wolves into loyal dogs. We built walls to keep out the dark and dangerous things. We looked up at the stars and decided to reach them, even when everyone said it was impossible." The recording had been made by the Resistance and broadcast across every communication channel on Earth before the Zephyrians could stop it. Dae-hyun continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "They want us to forget that we're the children of every human who ever stood up to a bully, who ever protected their family, who ever died so others could live free. They want us to forget that being peaceful is a choice we make, not something we're forced to be." The response was immediate and powerful. Across the globe, humans who had been slowly losing their edge suddenly remembered what they had been giving up. A construction worker in Tokyo stopped mid-swing with his hammer, remembering the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. A teacher in London realized she had been telling her students to stop competing with each other, when competition had always driven human progress. A mother in New York looked at her daughter's gentle art projects and remembered when the girl used to build fierce imaginary battles with her toys. The Zephyrians, who had been successfully guiding species for 500 years, found themselves facing something they had never encountered before: organized resistance from a species that remembered how to fight. Admiral Kim Tae-ho, who had been secretly maintaining contact with Earth's remaining military assets, received dozens of calls. Within hours of the broadcast, officers who had been forced into retirement, soldiers who had been retrained as cultural ambassadors, and even some who had been working with the Zephyrians began asking the same question. "What are our orders, sir? We're not trying to destroy them," Kim told his hastily assembled staff. "We're trying to convince them to leave us alone. They're not evil, but they're not our friends either. They're trying to change us into something we're not." The campaign that followed was unlike anything in military history. The Zephyrians had ships that could cross the galaxy, technology that seemed like magic, and centuries of experience in peaceful contact. But they had no weapons, no understanding of tactics, no experience with a species that refused to be domesticated. Colonel Park Jae-sung led small teams that moved through the cities like ghosts, disabling Zephyrian technology. Using methods the aliens couldn't understand, they didn't destroy the devices, they simply made them stop working by exploiting weaknesses the peaceful aliens had never thought to protect against. Captain Lee Hai-won organized networks of resistance fighters who appeared and disappeared so quickly that the Zephyrians couldn't track them. They used old subway tunnels, abandoned buildings, and even the sewers to move around undetected. The aliens, who had always relied on their ability to monitor and influence human communications, found themselves completely blind to the resistance's movements. Dr. Park Soo-jin and her team of scientists fought the war on a different front. They broadcast messages that exposed the Zephyrians' manipulation techniques, showed humans how to recognize when they were being psychologically controlled, and most importantly, reminded people of their own history and heritage. The war lasted only 3 weeks, but not because of superior firepower. It ended because the Zephyrians finally understood what they had encountered. Every other species they had guided had eventually accepted their peaceful transformation. But humans were different. They had learned to balance war and peace, to choose when to fight and when to show mercy. They had never completely abandoned their warrior nature. They had simply learned to control it. On April 12, 2158, Ambassador Veltar requested a final meeting. He stood before the human delegation in the same room where he had first offered friendship and guidance almost a year earlier. But now his tall form seemed smaller somehow, and his eternal smile was gone. We did not understand, he said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of sadness and something that might have been respect. We thought you were like the others, that you simply had not yet learned to embrace peace. We did not realize that you had already found your own balance, that your strength came not from abandoning your warrior nature, but from choosing when to use it. President Lee Dae-yoon stood flanked by Admiral Kim and Colonel Park, her face serious but not unkind. We welcome friendship, but not domination. We'll choose our own path to the stars. As the Zephyrian ships lifted off from Earth for the last time, they left behind more than just their abandoned technology and gifts. They transmitted a message across the galaxy that would be remembered for generations. Do not underestimate the humans. They welcomed us with smiles, but Earth remembers. War. Humanity had passed its first test as a galactic species. They had proven that true strength came not from endless fighting or complete pacifism, but from the wisdom to know when each was necessary. And across the galaxy, other civilizations began to take notice of the young species that had done something unprecedented. They had made the galaxy's most successful conquerors simply pack up and leave.